Welcome to the Canny Conversations podcast, Conversations with a Cause, with social entrepreneur Safaraz Ali.
Hello and welcome to Canny Conversations with my friend Safaraz Ali. These are canny conversations with a cause that we hope will captivate your curiosity cannily. And these are a series of broadcasts, and really they're a great success because of what I've done. I've really been the driving force behind these things, and then they wouldn't have been nearly as good as they've been if it hadn't been for me. And today we're talking, Saf, not about me, but we're talking about people who, within an organisation, feel they always have to try and claim the credit for pretty much everything. You've come across those people, and I guess you still do. How do you deal with them? But the first thing I wanted to say, Saf, is yes, everything you said at the beginning was absolutely true.
It's absolutely right, absolutely. And I always do that. I always give you the credit, and I think this is the word, isn't it? It's about credit for certain things that people have achieved or not achieved, but let's differentiate that from praising somebody, and praising it with the right intention. And I think a lot of this is about intention. There's certain people that need praise. There's certain people that actually seek and crave it, and then there's other people who sort of are motivated by it, and then there's others who are sort of demotivated if they're not acknowledged. Another key word here. So yeah, it's about taking credit. Some people are all about themselves, and you can see it, and everything becomes about themselves, and they bring you back to themselves, and they're really self-focused, and it's about either themselves or their the successes they've achieved, or they're talking about their team, but really it's all about themselves, or they're talking about maybe their family member, and really it's about, again, themselves, or it's about giving examples where people are sharing things about themselves or the situation, but genuinely it's about moving and improving that conversation, and there's a purpose in terms of why they're saying it and what they're saying for. So let's talk about, if we talk about people, I think often we don't praise the people that need to be praised or acknowledged, and there is genuinely a lack of that. There's a lack of not enough praise, and we need to be more comfortable with saying when people have done a good job and giving people the credit for achieving what they've achieved. If I give you an example, there's a situation where one of the managers that I work with said that people aren't used to it. And I turned that question around and said, well, is it the people aren't used to it, or are you not used to saying it and they're not used to hearing the praise from you? They're two different things or three different things. And really it's acknowledging people, particularly if they've gone above and beyond, if they're at the sort of shop floor or the front line, the coal face, the chalk face, is absolutely a must, isn't it? And I think we sometimes as individuals look to catch people out doing wrong things or look for faults in people, but I think we need to start looking at catching people out when they're doing the right things.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the vast majority of people respond much more positively to praise than they do to criticism. Being praised and feeling valued, in my opinion, is the biggest motivator that people can have in the workplace. Probably, dare I say, even a greater motivator than the financial rewards. But talking about, you've got somebody in a team who is very self-obsessed, very seeking of praise, often claiming credit, sometimes credit which is due to others. I think, Saf, that the first thing that a good manager would ask is why? Because the truth is that a lot of people who seek that sort of affirmation do it because they are, in fact, incredibly insecure. And in many respects, being constantly looking for reassurance, being constantly looking for praise can be a sign of huge insecurity. Do you agree with that?
I think you have all sorts. There are sorts of people who crave it, who've got an ego, narcissist in some aspects of it. They look at it and it's all about them and me being great and fantastic and so forth, and that constantly happens. But praise is a form of feedback. If I say to you, well done, but I give you why you've done well, and I give you feedback of what I've noticed and aspects of that, which I'm acknowledging, well done because of this. There's an element, there's a depth to it. Then you'll take light of that. You listen to that. If it's part of my normal language, and you've given me something and say thank you, well done, it's not regarded as really that level of feedback. So it's an element of feedback, but praise for not the sake of praise, but praise with some element of feedback, I think is where the individual should be looking for that. And I think we all need feedback in our different ways. There's so many dimensions to this. There's an element of acknowledgement. There's an element of, taking people for granted. Should people ask for feedback? I think feedback is continuous. It's there. When we also look to give feedback, we start with giving something positive, then we go in and give something negative, and then we sort of try and end up with something a little bit more positive. But the person focuses too much on the negative because we're not trained to give feedback, or we need to hone our skills in terms of giving feedback. But there's so many different levels of dimensions to this.
Well, I think there are a number of issues, and I think some of it is quite scientific. I mean, we have part of our brain, and I can't remember what the technical term is, but it's that part of the brain that senses fear, that senses threat. And if you say a series of things to me which are positive, and then you say something that is negative, if you did a scan of my brain, you would find the blood would be very quickly going to that part of the brain, which is the emotional part of the brain, which is the part of the brain that responds to threats, because people process negatives, people process what they perceive as being threatening far more quickly than they do positive things. And as we're in the animal world and we're in the realms of the human zoo, and I think a man called Dr. Desmond Morris years ago wrote a very good book called The Human Zoo. We are animals. We are part of the animal kingdom, and it is hardwired within our DNA over millions of years to seek to dominate, to seek to display. So particularly the case with males. Females are much more sensible and all the rest of it because they are less inclined to show off. They are more collaborative. They are more sharing. They are more empathetic. But the male of the species is genetically hardwired to show, because that's how he takes control of his harem of females. That's the way that he protects his territory. I'm really serious about this. We have millions of years of evolution that have left a situation where we as males are predisposed to try to dominate others, to try to impress, to try to show. And that's part of what's happening, isn't it? In a team situation, a team is a pack, and somebody tries to assert themselves as the leader of that pack. Did you not agree with that?
There's so many things there that you've got to unpack and you've got to look at, and as managers and leaders, we've got to start understanding human nature, human characteristics, how people tick, and part of that is a really understanding what our drivers are, what our belief systems are. And really, we've got to be attuned to that. We've got to be aware of that. We've got to be attuned to it. And it's continuously learning and understanding people and understanding how people function and how people function when others are in that team. We've had situations where, we're alerted to certain keywords. So, we've got this reticular activation system. You talk about the brain before, you've got different levels to that. And we have that sense where people feel threatened. They feel the sense of challenge, but it's also understanding people's comfort zones and really and being in a position where they understand that if the individual cares, there's a saying is that we listen to the person that says it for the right reasons. If I know that you care, then I care in terms of what you say, and it's really understanding all of that. But yes, there's an element of this peacock element where you're showing off and you're sort of trying to overpower people, but it's really what's behind that, what's the depth to that. is that a form of insecurity for that individual? Is that person doing it because they need that element of, they understand that they've got certain weaknesses, they're threatened, and this is a way that is a huff and puff and bluster because they're trying to distract, so they're trying to move away from that. So they're trying to distract, they're trying to move it away from where their own weaknesses are or their own issues are and move it to something else. And we as managers, as leaders, as people who are more attuned to understanding people need to be more conscious that what's behind that. There's always something that's going to be behind people's actions and why they do certain things, and it's not about us being psychologists here, but it's really being attuned to these signals, attuned to what's being said, and really the underlying aspects of the reasons why I say it. And people sometimes don't come to the point straight away, but it's really reading between the lines and understanding what's been said and the context behind it, and what's the root cause of it.
Yep. The truth, though, of course, Sav, is a lot of leaders don't got a clue. They don't have a clue how people work and how people think. And that's one of the big problems. We're going to come back to the point I made earlier on. What are the two biggest drivers in terms of human behaviour? The second biggest driver in terms of human behaviour is self-preservation. And self-preservation is about being top of the pack, being a leader, being the last one to get picked off when the hyenas start taking the weakest. The biggest driver in all human behaviour is preservation of the species. And that's about basically making sure that future generations survive. That goes beyond self-preservation. I mean, there are enormous, number of examples of the animal world where, one of the species, where the male of the species mates but knows in the process of doing that, they'll probably end up dying. They're getting eaten by the female. But in that case, their desire to keep the species going is greater than their desire to self-preservation. Understanding these primeval drivers is something which a lot of managers just don't understand. And I think that in terms of, someone showing off within a team, more often than not, if you want to curb that behaviour, you take them to one side and you give them a level of reassurance, and you'll find that behaviour will be modified. That's generally been my experience. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of things there. I mean, self-preservation for me often is about security. It's not necessarily about winning. And winning is a different streak. We're going into slightly different territory here, but self-preservation is about, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's about your basics. It's about your security. And people sometimes are secure in a way. They don't like change. They don't like to be brought to the surface. They just want to stay under the radar. They just want to carry on as they are. And there's that. So they don't want the attention. They don't seek the attention. They just want things to carry on. And then there's others who are more dominant in terms of, looking to win, looking to gain, looking to become number one. And it's the constant element at all cost. And this is where that also causes trouble, and it has caused many. We've got many examples where that banker, the example of the risks that they take, and it's about winning at all costs. That's slightly different to self-preservation. It's not about self-preservation. It's about getting the limelight and really coming out on top at all times. And really, if you're in that position where you want the attention, you want the element of, you want to be number one, and you crave it at all costs, you're prepared to take risks, prepared to take a gamble, and you're prepared to walk over people, you're prepared to put the organization's pedigree, the brand, the reputation at risk because how your mind thinks and how and what you think is right. And underneath, people know that they will get caught out and it will backfire, but for that moment the person carries on. And we've got many examples of that, and they're living for the now. They want the attention, and it's short-termism, and that's different in my eyes, and that's different to somebody who is just looking to get along. But if you go back to validation and praising and acknowledging people, the lessons learned from a manager is we've got to be attuned to, what works for people. If I start praising somebody and they might be alerted to, what does this person want? So that might be the first thing. They might not be used to it. They might be thinking, well, I've never been acknowledged before. So you've got to start thinking from a practical day-to-day leadership management perspective. How do we get to a position where we can give feedback, we can praise people, we can give them constructive feedback, we can give them critical feedback without them putting barriers up, without them running scared, without them thinking the fact that, is this a challenge? And for them to actually really listen into the depth of what's been said without really, as I said, putting barriers up. And I think that's really what we need to try and get to.
In one voice, you're saying, people shouldn't be show-offs and they shouldn't be trying to peacock. And that's exactly what most companies encourage them to do. That's the culture within most companies. If you've got a system where, within a group of people, there's key performance indicators, and those key performance indicators are published, and people are encouraged to compare themselves against others, don't complain if people peacock and try and put themselves at the top of the pile.
I mean, these are aspirational targets. This is about growth. This is about also benchmarking and looking at improvements. A culture of high performance is about transparency. It's about showing the numbers and being open to discussing and being in a position where, you can get growth. There's an epidemic disease, which is boasting. And boasting is different to high performance and a culture of high performance and looking to improve. People sometimes boast, praise themselves when there's no substance. That's not really about results or outcome or being number one or getting to that position where you're aspirational. And I think, we've got to see, what's behind that. Where is the depth to it? Otherwise it's like you're in a position where, just repeating, and repetition has many benefits, but repetition for the sake of repetition and repeating something which isn't necessarily true or correct or has no sense or depth to it does backfire.
But if you've got a situation where a group of people have a set of key performance indicators in terms of sales or leads and all the rest of it, and those performance figures are published and shared around, you can hardly complain if people start to be highly competitive with each other and feel themselves threatened. Because if you're in a group of 6 people and you've got less sales than anybody else in the 6, you're gonna feel threatened. That's the nuts and bolts of it. That's basic human nature. So the only point I'm making is, don't criticise people for peacocking when the systems are in place within many organisations that absolutely encourage that sort of behaviour.
I mean, in that particular situation, people may feel threatened, but they're not going to go out and boast. They look at ways of improving. So that you've got to see that as a positive. The peacocking element is blatant showing off where there's no substance and, validating themselves and promoting themselves. And it's that whole element of they start believing their own hype, they start believing their own PR, and they start believing their own successes. And one thing that we have learned is that sometimes success begets failure because it leads to failure. If somebody is, complacent, they're in a position where they feel that, they've achieved it all, they've done it all, what you'll find is that if you're number one, soon you become number 2 and number 3 because, you lose that mantle because you're not looking to continuously grow. And this is where sometimes where larger organizations fail because they haven't got that same level of ambition, drive that they had when they weren't number one or they weren't at the top. And these charts are never constant. They're all evolving. But what does that do? That it looks at improving. And if you're at the bottom of the league and you see it as a positive, then hopefully you're looking to improve. But so there are some people that give up, that will say, I'm at the bottom of the league. I've got no chance of going anywhere. That's when you're taking it in a negative light. It should be seen as a motivator, but more importantly, as a driver for you to improve and grow and aspirational and benchmark yourself.
why would some companies, I'm not saying yours does, but why would some companies effectively set employee against employee by having league tables in terms of performance? Surely you don't have to do that to encourage and help people to improve.
That's a form of benchmark. It's about transparency. It's about an organisation being in a position where they recognise, they praise the people who have achieved success. It's like, it's a culture where it is a competitive environment. It's a culture where you can strive to something, and giving people the opportunity to see, what people can achieve. Otherwise, you're in a position where you think, how do you benchmark? You need that element of some element of objectivity and some element of competition and some element where you can.
Yeah, but you don't have to share it. That's the point I'm making. If people are struggling, you can help them and to encourage them and support them to be better. If people are doing well, then you can praise them and recognise their success. But what you don't have to do is create these internal league tables, in effect, which just promote fear. And therefore, what that fear does is when people are fearful, people are anxious. And when people are anxious, their performance drops. You see it all the time. If you're on a cricket field and you're in a slip cordon and somebody, nicks the ball and you drop an easy catch, are you more likely to drop the next catch because everybody turns around and says, stupid. What an easy catch that was. You should have held that. Or if they say nothing, the more you put pressure on people, the worse they will perform. And what these internal league tables do is they are essentially trying to create peer pressure through fear. They're about creating a short-term competitive type element. I agree with you entirely, Saf, that people who are struggling need to be supported for their own good and also for the good of the organisation. And I absolutely agree with you that people who are doing well need to be praised and have that success recognised. But what you don't have to do is set up these diversive internal structures, which some companies do. Do you not see the point that demotivating people, knocking people, criticising them, making them feel bad about themselves doesn't do anything in terms of improving their or the organisation's performance?
I think, again, there's a few things that you've said, which is predominantly seeing it as a negative in terms of transparency, about openness and about tripping people up. It's not about tripping people up or, yes, fine, success. If you're on a winning streak, you're likely to have achieved more success and so forth, but it's also not resting on your laurels, isn't it? So, success does breed success, but success also begets failure as well, leads to failure. And it's that element of continuously looking to improve. If you're in a position where you feel that you're at the bottom of the league, or you're in a position where you're doing what you're doing, what's the comparator? And it's really about making people aware. It's about, the first thing of any action is awareness. If you haven't got the awareness, if you haven't got the benchmarks, if you haven't got that understanding, and I think you need competition within teams, and I think you need competition within organizations to try and create high performance and create a culture where performance matters and performance is what we're about, but not at any cost. And we've got to see the positive in every situation. Yes, we can focus on the negatives and say, well, actually, we need to mollycoddle people or we need to support people and so forth. But it's the same thing, isn't it? Supporting in a positive way to actually grow, or supporting to try and protect people.
Support in a positive way, absolutely. And, I couldn't agree more than that. And I couldn't agree more than, there will be people in any organisation where the performance needs to improve and they need help. What I'm suggesting is that having these sort of league tables which set employer against employee against employee don't help. We're in unusual circumstances because of COVID. But why are so many young people frightened of examinations that would be taking place at this time of the year? The answer is they're not. They're not frightened of the exam. They're frightened of being shown up when the results are published. Children, young people, when they have examinations, those results should be shared between themselves and the college that they're going to. They shouldn't be published. Individual results shouldn't be published. It just doesn't help. It is counterproductive. It is old-fashioned.
I mean, what does good look like? I mean, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, when you look at anything, you look at some sort of benchmark, some sort of barometer. Whether it's school, in terms of your area, whether it's a neighborhood, you look at figures, you look at numbers, you look at comparators, you look at measurement. That measurement might be crime rates. So you want the lowest crime rate. You might be quality of life, quality of service, and everything revolves around data, numbers, and it's part of life. And where again, in terms of schools and so forth, it's the results, and the results drive our view on certain things. Our environment dictates behavior, and you create an environment where there are going to be winners. There are going to be some people who aren't winners, who are losers. And it's like having a school race and saying, well, everybody's a winner, everybody's going to get a badge. That's not life, unfortunately.
Actually, it's absolutely nothing of the sort. In a competitive situation like a sport or a race, you have that level of competition. But what it should always be focused on is improving performance. And improving performance, for the most, but occasionally, you will get individuals where what they needed to kick up the backside. But for the vast majority of people don't do things badly because they deliberately choose to do things badly. They do things badly, or they struggle because they need help, they need support, they need reassurance. And creating a situation in which they are effectively demeaned amongst their peers is not going to help them, and it's not going to help the organisation. And it's encouraging the peacocking that we've already talked about, and it's encouraging the show-off behaviour that we've already talked about.
I think your current position and where your past is doesn't necessarily dictate the fact that that's where you are going to be in the future. These things do change, and it's how we overcome these obstacles, how we see these things. And, we've got to be in a position where you see the benefit of it and see in terms of how do you actually grow as individuals, how do we grow as people. And, yes, we can go to the position where there's got to be certain elements of protection, and we talk about welfare and we talk about mental health, and we've got to talk about those things, and we can't take those lightly. But we've got to be in a position where you encourage, you nourish, and you nurture growth, and you nurture people to get the best possible outcome that they can achieve, and be in a position where they can be the best version of themselves and the better versions of themselves, and continuously strive on a journey of lifelong learning and lifelong continuous improvement. And I think this is how you see it. We can look at the negatives of any aspect of it, or the pros and cons. There's always going to be pros and cons.
I agree with all of that, Saf, and you're absolutely right, and very wise in that respect. All I'm asking you is how demeaning people in front of their peers helps to achieve those objectives.
It's never about making people a scapegoat or demeaning anybody. I think it's about aspirational targets, aspirational achievements, and celebrating success, celebrating achievement. It's not necessarily about reprimanding or putting people backs up, because that is a demotivator. But it's about really looking at challenging people to be better, to growing. And there's always going to be that element of challenge and support. When it comes to board meetings and your peers, you need the right level of challenge, but you need also the right level of support, and the two go hand in hand. How do you challenge somebody? How do you create a high perform? Everybody talks about a high performing culture, but how do you create that? So yes, you're focusing more on the support element of it, and not and the element of not naming and shaming, but where is the success coming from? How do you create that high performing culture? And that's what we've got to focus on in terms of where does that come from? How do you look at those improvements?
Now that's all very good stuff. That's a fine view. It's a fascinating topic, and if we had an hour or 2 hours, we'd probably still be talking about it. But we haven't got an hour or 2 hours. That's been a pretty vigorous conversation, Safa, and of course that's what friends do. They have ideas, and it's not a case of being right or wrong. And some people will agree with me, and some people will no doubt agree with you, and that's more important. What really matters is what our listeners think. We want you to join our conversation. We want you to hopefully subscribe, and most importantly of all, let us know what you think. And we'll be back next time having another conversation amongst friends.
Thanks for listening to this canny conversation with a cause. These conversations are based upon the Canny Bites books by Safaraz Ali, available on Amazon. To find out more, go online and visit Saf's website, pathwaygroup.co.uk, or join him on social media. He can be contacted at safraz@pathwaygroup.co.uk.